It was a bright Thursday morning, and The View was in full swing, the iconic talk show that mixed politics, pop culture, and controversy in equal measure. The show had been running for years, known for its candid discussions and fiery debates. But that day, an unusual tension hung in the air as the panel took their seats. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, had agreed to appear as a guest on the show, her first time since being appointed by President Donald Trump. She had become a familiar face on the national stage, known for her sharp wit, unwavering defense of conservative principles, and her ability to hold her ground in any situation. The producers were thrilled to have her, especially with the anticipation that her appearance would spark some fireworks. As the segment began, the conversation quickly turned to religion. Whoopi Goldberg, ever the provocateur, asked, "Do you think religion should have any place in politics, Karoline? Isn't that a bit outdated?" Karoline, always composed, smiled politely. "I believe in the separation of church and state, but I also believe that faith plays an important role in shaping values. For many Americans, religion is a personal guide." It was at that moment that Joy Behar, another regular on the show, leaned forward, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Well, Karoline," she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "I think it's funny when people say they follow God, but then they're okay with all sorts of immoral things happening in the world. Don't you think that's a bit hypocritical?" Karoline's smile faltered for a moment, sensing the provocation in Joy's words, but she kept her cool. She had dealt with much worse. "I think it's important to stay true to your values and try to live by them, no matter the circumstances. But everyone is imperfect." But Joy, not one to back down, laughed out loud. "Oh, come on, Karoline. Seriously? Do you really believe that some invisible man up in the sky is watching us all the time? I mean, that's just a fairy tale." The audience fell silent. Karoline's expression hardened, her composure barely holding as Joy's words cut through the air like a sharp knife. The panelists looked uncomfortable, but Joy seemed to be reveling in the moment, smirking as she looked around at her co-hosts for support. "Are you seriously mocking God?" Karoline asked, her voice steady but filled with an underlying anger. Joy, without missing a beat, laughed louder. "I'm just saying, if you want to put your faith in something that sounds like it belongs in a children's book, that's your choice. But don't expect the rest of us to follow suit." At that moment, Karoline's face hardened with determination. She wasn't one to let slights go unchecked, especially when it came to something so sacred. She took a deep breath and leaned forward, looking directly at Joy. "Joy, I think it's clear we're not going to agree on this. But mocking someone's faith is not only disrespectful, it's dangerous. It undermines the values that so many people hold dear. And that kind of mockery can come back to haunt you." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged with meaning. The studio was eerily quiet. The other hosts seemed to be bracing themselves for what would happen next. Karoline's warning was not one of anger, but of something far deeper, a calm, collected certainty. But Joy wasn't done. She chuckled under her breath and turned her attention to the audience, trying to shrug off the discomfort. "Oh, please. People need to grow up. We're in the 21st century, not the Dark Ages." Karoline's lips pressed into a tight line. She had a choice to make. She could walk away from the conversation, letting Joy's words slide. Or she could teach her a lesson that would last far longer than a fleeting moment of mockery. As the cameras rolled, Karoline knew that she had to take a stand, not just for her faith, but for the respect of millions of Americans who believed deeply in God. "All right, Joy," Karoline said, her voice low and firm. "You might find this funny now. But what you're doing is far more serious than you think. It's not just about God, it's about respect. And in the end, we all have to answer for how we treat others." The words landed like a bombshell. A hush fell over the studio, and for the first time all morning, Joy seemed to be at a loss for words. The tension was palpable, the divide between them unmistakable. But Karoline's words had struck at the heart of something much bigger than a TV debate. Something that Joy would soon come to realize was not just about religion, but about the deep cost of disrespecting what others hold sacred. The next few days were a whirlwind for Karoline Leavitt. Her appearance on The View had quickly gone viral, sparking a firestorm of controversy across the internet and media. While her supporters praised her for standing her ground, others criticized her for taking the bait. In the world of politics, especially when you were a representative of the president, every move was scrutinized. But it was not just Karoline's words that had made headlines, it was Joy Behar's mocking dismissal of faith that had truly struck a nerve with the American public. People on both sides of the political spectrum were outraged. Some found Joy's comments distasteful, while others felt that Karoline's response had been too calculated and politically charged. The press coverage was intense and the online backlash was even worse. "I don't understand why people are so upset," Joy said in an interview a few days after the incident. "It was just a joke. We're living in a modern world where people need to stop taking everything so seriously." But it seemed that the public wasn't quite ready to let her off the hook. Online petitions calling for Joy's apology began circulating, with thousands of people signing their names in protest. In conservative circles, Karoline was hailed as a hero. "Finally, someone who stands up for what's right," one supporter wrote on Twitter. Joy Behar went too far this time, and Karoline had the guts to call her out. The next episode of The View saw the usual banter and lighthearted discussions, but the underlying tension between Joy and Karoline was undeniable. The audience could sense the change in the air, the once playful dynamic now tinged with something darker. Karoline knew that the controversy wasn't going to go away anytime soon. She had become the focal point of a larger cultural divide, a divide between those who saw faith as a cornerstone of life and those who viewed it as an outdated relic. But for Karoline, this was about more than just politics. This was about standing firm in her beliefs and taking a stand for millions of Americans who felt that their faith was under attack. Meanwhile, Joy was dealing with her own fallout. The backlash had not only affected her reputation but also the reputation of The View itself. Advertisers began pulling their ads, citing concerns over the divisive nature of the show. The producers were anxious, wondering if this was the beginning of a larger crisis. It was in the midst of this chaos that Karoline received an unexpected call, a call that would change everything. The phone rang early one morning, the sound cutting through the quiet of Karoline's home. She recognized the number immediately. It was a private line used by high-ranking officials in the White House. "Karoline, it's Jared," the voice on the other end said. Jared Kushner, senior advisor to the president, was a close confidant of Donald Trump. "The president wants to speak with you about something." Karoline's heart skipped a beat. She had dealt with plenty of intense conversations in her role as press secretary, but this felt different. "Of course, Jared. When?" "Now," Jared replied. "I'll put him on." Seconds later, Karoline was speaking directly with the president. "Karoline," President Trump's voice boomed over the line, "I saw what happened on The View. You did a great job holding your ground, but I want you to be prepared. This thing is going to blow up even more than it already has. You're going to have to teach them all a lesson now. Show them what happens when they disrespect faith and the American people." Karoline listened intently, knowing that this was a pivotal moment for her career and her values. The president's words were powerful, but it was the underlying message that resonated the most. This was more than just a media battle. It was a battle for the soul of the country. "I understand, Mr. President," Karoline replied, her resolve hardening. "I'll make sure to do what's necessary." "You have my full support," Trump said. "And remember, this is about respect. Not just for you, but for the millions of Americans who believe in God and the values this country was built on." The conversation ended and Karoline sat back, deep in thought. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. If anyone was going to teach Joy Behar and the rest of the world a lesson about the importance of faith and respect, it was going to be her. The media storm surrounding Karoline Leavitt's appearance on The View continued to escalate, but as the dust settled, Karoline had a clear mission. She was determined to make sure that Joy Behar and others who mocked faith would understand the real consequences of their words. But Karoline knew that the best way to fight back wasn't just to continue arguing in the media, it was to bring the fight to the heart of the matter. Karoline began planning her next move carefully, preparing for what was bound to be a showdown. She knew that people across America were watching, waiting for someone to stand up and demand respect for their faith. Karoline decided to use her platform as the White House press secretary to send a powerful message, one that would resonate far beyond the walls of Washington, D.C. A week later, Karoline appeared on Fox News for an exclusive interview with Sean Hannity. The moment the camera started rolling, the mood shifted from the usual political banter to something far more serious. "Karoline, I've got to ask," Sean began, his voice serious. "After what happened on The View, how are you handling the backlash? It's been relentless." Karoline looked directly into the camera, her gaze unwavering. "Sean, it's been tough. But I don't back down when it comes to standing up for what I believe in. What happened on that show was more than just a disagreement, it was an attack on the values that so many Americans hold dear." The audience listening in could sense the shift in Karoline's tone. She wasn't just defending herself, she was speaking for millions of people who felt silenced and mocked. "I think it's time for people to realize that mocking faith, any faith, isn't just some harmless joke. It's an attack on the very fabric of who we are as a nation. And while Joy Behar may think it's funny, I can assure you that this isn't just going to blow over. It's going to have consequences. Sean nodded gravely. But Karoline, you know how the media works. The left will spin this into something else. They'll say you're being too sensitive. Karoline's voice remained steady. I'm not being sensitive. I'm being responsible. The media has their narrative and I know they'll try to twist it. But the truth is, when you disrespect someone's faith, you're disrespecting the very core of their identity. That's not something we should take lightly. And if they want to mock me or anyone else who stands for their faith, that's fine. But they should know that there's a price to pay. The interview ended with a powerful message. Karoline was not backing down. The fallout from her appearance on The View wasn't over, but she had just taken control of the narrative. She had gone on the offensive, making it clear that she was prepared to fight for respect for her beliefs and for the beliefs of countless others. The day after her interview with Hannity, the response from the public was overwhelming. People across America, from conservative circles to devout religious communities, rallied behind Karoline. It was clear that her message had resonated. Mocking faith was not just a lighthearted joke, and Karoline was determined to make that point loud and clear. Then, out of nowhere, something unexpected happened. Joy Behar, who had been silent since the initial backlash, took to social media. It wasn't the apology that many had hoped for. Instead, it was a statement that seemed to fuel the fire even more. I guess some people just can't take a joke. Joy wrote on Twitter, followed by a laughing emoji. I stand by what I said. If you don't like it, too bad. This sent the media into overdrive. Critics and supporters alike were quick to react. The left-wing media rallied around Joy, calling Karoline's response overblown. But it was clear that Joy's dismissive tone had only worsened the situation. In the following days, Karoline issued one last statement. It wasn't a fiery rant, nor was it an attack on Joy. Instead, it was a measured, calm response that made a far more profound point than anyone expected. I'm not here to wage a personal war against Joy Behar, Karoline said in her statement. What I'm doing is calling attention to something much more important. We live in a country where freedom of speech and religion are foundational values. And while we can disagree on many things, we must always respect each other's right to believe in something greater than ourselves. When we mock those beliefs, we create division and sow discord. And I believe that's the real issue here. The response to Karoline's statement was immense. Support poured in from religious groups, conservative leaders, and everyday Americans who felt they had been silenced for far too long. In a world that had become increasingly polarized, Karoline had managed to transcend politics and stand firm in a belief that united people on both sides of the aisle: respect for faith. But the most significant consequence of the showdown came when The View itself was forced to acknowledge the impact of the controversy. The show's ratings had plummeted, and advertisers who had once been eager to sign on began pulling their support. Behind the scenes, tensions ran high, and it became clear that the network had underestimated the power of a unified audience willing to fight for their values. It was a humbling moment for Joy Behar, who had mocked Karoline and the faith of millions. But in the end, the lesson wasn't just for Joy, it was for everyone who thought they could dismiss the importance of faith without consequences. Karoline had won more than just a media battle. She had reminded America of what it meant to stand up for respect, dignity, and the values that built the nation. As Karoline Leavitt left her office that evening, she took a deep breath, knowing that she had achieved something far greater than a political victory. She had reminded people across America that no matter what side of the political spectrum they were on, the foundation of their identity and their country should always be respected.